Tonight, decision on petroleum subsidy removal tossed to the next government as federal government announces extension of subsidy regime by 18 months. Nigeria Labour Congress suspends proposed nationwide protests following government's U-turn on subsidy removal. National Assembly passes harmonised version of the electoral bill, includes the option of direct, indirect and consensus arrangement for political parties. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson battles for political survival as the police investigate Downing Street lockdown parties. Plus international news from our studio in London.
On business news tonight, International Monetary Fund downgrades 2022 global growth forecast to 4.4% on the back of multiple challenges and rising inflation.
On sports news tonight, CAF moves Sunday's African Cup of Nations quarter-final due to be played at the Olympus Stadium in Yaoundé to another after Monday's tragedy left 8 people dead.
And from Abuja, the president launches national policy on 5G technology in the nation's capital, admonishes agencies to take advantage of the innovation in addressing issues on security and the economy.
Following its suspension of the planned removal of fuel subsidy, the federal government is proposing an extension of the subsidy regime for 18 months as it seeks an amendment of the Petroleum Industry Act by the National Assembly. The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Mr. Timipre Silva, who announced this today during the weekly ministerial briefing, explained that the decision to seek an amendment to the law is not politically motivated. Our State House correspondent, Gloria Mizoke, reports.
Moments after emerging from a meeting with the president in his office, the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Mr. Timipre Silva, addresses State House correspondents at the weekly ministerial briefing. He clarifies that the president has officially given approval for the suspension of fuel subsidy removal until further notice. But after a few questions on the legality of the process, he reveals the full plan.
We will apply for some amendment of the law so that we will still be within the law. We are proposing an 18-month extension, but what the National Assembly is going to approve will be up to them. We will approve an 18-month extension. We will propose an 18-month extension. And then, of course, it's up to the National Assembly to look at it and then pass the amendment as they see fit.
The federal government also anticipates that before the actual removal of fuel subsidy, potentially in 2023, other critical measures would have been enabled.
The Dangote refinery is expected to come on stream at the end of this year. All our refineries, the Port Harcourt refinery, is expected to be performing at a certain capacity, not full capacity, by end of this year. There are some modular refineries that are also going to come on stream later this year.
Reacting to existing queues at petrol stations in the nation's capital, Mr. Silva insists that it is as a result of panic buying and hoarding in anticipation of a change in policy. He, however, maintains that the federal government is in active communication with Labour.
Our discussion with Labour is also around these palliatives and mitigations. So all this will have to come together. That's why we decided at this time, especially since we are running against time.
So essentially, the federal government has between now and February 16, which is about 3 weeks from now, to amend that particular section of the law so that they will not be in breach of it. And beyond that, the minister is also assuring that the possibility of increasing the price of fuel will not be a consideration in the coming months. From the presidential villa, Gloria Umezuke, Channels Television News.
And in response to the new stance of the federal government, the Nigerian Labour Congress, NLC, has suspended its planned nationwide protest against the initial announcement to remove subsidy on petrol from July. According to the NLC, it plans to continue to engage with the government on issues of ensuring local refining of petroleum, creation of sustainable jobs, and affordable price of petrol for Nigerian workers and people.
At the peak of very rigorous mobilization of Nigerians by the Nigerian Labour Congress and a host of her civil society allies, the federal government, through the Minister of Finance yesterday, 24th January 2020, made a public announcement reversing the plan to increase petroleum pump price. The position of government was also officially communicated to Congress with calls for further engagement. Following the reversal and reapproach by government, the National Executive Council of the Nigerian Labour Congress met this afternoon virtually to consider the new position of the government. The NEC, after vigorous debate, took a decision to suspend the planned nationwide process scheduled for 27th of January 2022, and the national protest also scheduled for 2nd of February 2022. The leadership of the Congress have communicated this organ decision to our civil society allies, who have stood stoically behind us and behind Nigerian workers in our quest for social and economic justice for workers and the downtrodden people of our country. Going forward, we will continue to engage with government on the very critical issue of ensuring local refining of petroleum products, creation of sustainable jobs, and affordable price of petroleum for Nigerians and particularly Nigerian workers.
Meanwhile, the chairman of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group is also lending his voice to the debate on the removal of fuel subsidy. Mr. Laoye Jayola highlighted some critical areas that must be addressed before it is implemented. He stated this during the launch of the NESG outlook for the 2022 macroeconomy in Abuja.
40% of our population are consuming less than 3% of fuel consumption. 40%. And this is work that both the World Bank and others have looked at it. And therefore, we should realize that this is a subsidy more to the rich than the poor. And therefore, whenever you want to do a subsidy, what I will urge that we try to do is that how do we ensure that this 40% people are helped in one shade of form so that you can cushion the impact of the removal of subsidy on them. But 40% of our population only consume 3%. The bulk of it is consumed by most of us in this place. I have quite a number of cars that live in the city in Lagos and Abuja and what have you. And so the fifth thing we think you should consider when you are taking the decision on fuel is to say, how do we ensure we invest in the down and midstream sector of the economy? So again, at the NESG, part of what we do in our research is to look at both sides of the divide. Look at all the issues and bring the issues to fore. And I'm saying, whichever way we decide, these 5 areas should be considered. But one thing is clear. Subsidy is not what I think we can sustain for a long run.
Away from fuel subsidy to another burning issue, this time at the National Assembly, which has re-amended the Electoral Act Amendment Bill to include provisions which now clearly define the mode of primaries for political parties. Both chambers passed the harmonized version of the bill that includes direct, indirect and consensus methods for political parties to nominate candidates for electoral positions. Our correspondent Linda Kigwe reports.
Distinguished colleagues,
Federal legislators in the Senate and House of Representatives are once again fine-tuning the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, specifically Clause 84, which relates to the method of party primaries to nominate candidates for elective positions. President Buhari had refused to give his assent to the amendment bill faulting the National Assembly's inclusion of mandatory direct primaries for political parties. But last week, the National Assembly rescinded its earlier position on compulsory direct primaries and included indirect and consensus methods as options. However, the House of Representatives, which did not include the option of consensus method, is again reversing itself and now supports the method, but with some conditions.
I think the House and the Senate have decided to add, I believe, the consensus provision so that there will be no need for conference, but with certain provisos. And those provisos, hopefully, we'll be able to agree and insert them today to protect all aspirants for all positions, so that we'll all have an even playing field.
As regards consensus candidates, the amended bill provides in Clause 84(9) that a political party that adopts a consensus candidate shall secure the written consent of all cleared aspirants for the position, indicating their voluntary withdrawal from the race and the endorsement of the consensus candidate. It also states that where a political party is unable to secure the written consent of all cleared aspirants for the purpose of a consensus candidate, it shall revert to the choice of direct or indirect primaries for the nomination of candidates for the aforesaid elective positions. Furthermore, a special convention or nomination congress shall be held to ratify the choice of consensus candidates at designated centers at the national, state, senatorial, federal and state constituencies, as the case may be.
Distinguished colleagues,
the harmonized version of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill is also before the Senate for passage.
for the consensus, the two chambers have produced in this bill now very clear definition of how a consensus candidate would emerge.
The amendment bill is to be sent to President Buhari once again for assent. Linda Akibe, Channels Television News.
While lawmakers are justifying the decision to include the consensus candidacy option in the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, for the civil society community, the consensus method will deny party members the opportunity to elect a candidate. Our correspondent Terry Kumi reports.
Consensus provision has now been defined and guidelines stipulated in the new law.
Speaker of the House of Representatives Femi Gbajabiamila making a case for the inclusion of the consensus option for political parties' primaries. The Green Chamber turned rowdy last Wednesday after members learned that the Senate had included the consensus option of party primaries in the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. It was the decision of the House of Representatives last week to stick strictly with the provisions of the President's letter, indicating only the direct and indirect methods of party primaries. Fast forward a week later, and lawmakers in the Green Chamber have had a change of heart.
We felt, okay, if we were going to include it, it would have to be defined, which was why there was a definition for consensus, definition for direct primaries, and definition for indirect primaries.
The whole country is looking forward to the Electoral Act, and anything that would delay it, nobody's happy about it. So this decision that was taken, we believe it will make it easier for the Electoral Act to come out.
Including it, but putting a condition with regards to how consensus should be defined or applied was the best thing for Nigerians.
A member of the coalition of civil society organizations who had commended the Green Chamber for ignoring the consensus option appears disappointed, even with a clause which makes it compulsory that a written statement approving the consensus candidate must be obtained from all aspirants of a position by the political party.
The challenge with that procedure is you are stripping, members of political parties with the opportunity to elect, candidates of their choice. And practice have shown that most political parties, don't adopt and uphold certain principles even in consensus making.
With this amendment, lawmakers believe that political godfathers can no longer sit in their rooms and decide on a consensus candidate. Rather, that decision would have to be made by the candidates cleared for that particular position. All eyes now turn to the president for assent or veto, considering that the option of consensus was not initially contained in his letter of refusal to the National Assembly. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
In part two after the break, Central Bank of Nigeria holds its first Monetary Policy Committee briefing in 2022, leaves key rates unchanged. We'll be joined by renowned economist, Mr. Bismarck Rewane. Please stay with us. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Decision on petroleum subsidy removal tossed to the next government as federal government announces extension of subsidy regime by 18 months. Nigeria Labour Congress suspends proposed nationwide protests following government's U-turn on subsidy removal. National Assembly passes harmonized version of the electoral bill, includes option of direct, indirect and consensus arrangement for political parties. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson battles for political survival as the police investigate Downing Street lockdown parties. Inflation in most developed and emerging economies such as Nigeria will remain high, driven by persistent exchange rate fluctuations and supply bottlenecks. This is the observation of the Central Bank Monetary Policy Committee at the end of its first meeting this year in Abuja, where it announced the decision to leave all key parameters unchanged. The central bank governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, attributes the increase in inflation, which stands at 15.6% as at December 2021, to increased demand during the Yuletide.
It's the first Monetary Policy Committee meeting for the year, and after 2 days of deliberations, the central bank governor and members of the committee assess how the nation's economy fared in the last 2 months, considering happenings at the global market which impacted the economy.
The central bank released on a monthly basis.
The committee observes that inflation and the new variant of COVID-19 and lack of access to vaccines, specifically by emerging economies, is affecting economic growth. There are further growth projections for the year 2022. While the central bank is looking at a growth of 2.8%, the federal government and the International Monetary Fund are projecting growth rates of 4.2% and 2.7%.
The committee noted that while the recovery of the global economy in 2021 fell below the initial forecasts, final estimates showed considerable improvement over the 2020 outcome and evidence that the global economy was pulling out of the doldrum associated with the pandemic. Consequently, the recovery is gaining momentum with increasing consumer spending, upswing in investments, and soaring world merchandise trade above pre-pandemic levels. These reflect the resilience of economic agents in the face of new strains of the virus and rising infection rates.
The central bank governor then says its intervention across various sectors of the economy to boost business activities, which run into billions of naira, is yielding results. But this is not without worrisome trends. Again, Mr. Emefiele assures of measures put in place by both the monetary and fiscal authorities to address the situation.
The issue remains that we see logistical challenges in moving food from farm to market, from farm gates to market, and also the activities of hoarders, and we're going to do everything possible to stop this.
And after much deliberations, the central bank retained the monetary policy rate at 11.5%. Other parameters left unchanged are the cash reserve ratio and liquidity ratio at 27.5% and 30%.
Well, joining us for more on the latest MPC decisions on the news at 10 is Mr. Bismarck Rewane, Chief Executive Officer, Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin. The MPC has again left key parameters unchanged. What's your reaction to that decision?
The slide says same old, right? 25 times out of 28, no change. Okay, so, and it's all about inflation. And so, typically, in a high inflationary environment, what you do is to increase interest rates. But they didn't do it this time. Why? Because you've had 7 consecutive declines, and one uptick is not enough to get a trend. Therefore, it makes sense to wait and see. But you see, the thing about this is that he mentioned 3 things. One, the money supply, broad money supply grew from about 7.1 or something to 10.4. There was about a 3% increase in broad money supply. That's one. 2, he was of the view, or the committee was of the view, that this was temporary and transient inflation. And thirdly, he did say that the harvest was going to increase output, and therefore things will normalize in the next 3 months. The reality is that it's difficult when you have increased money supply. It's difficult when you have global inflation all over the place, and you can see from one of the slides that inflation has become ubiquitous. Inflation here, inflation there, inflation everywhere. So what do we have? In Nigeria, it's 15.63. The US is 7%. In the UK, it's 5.4%. In South Africa, it's 5.9%. And in Ghana, it's 12.6%. So it's not Nigeria specific, but the Nigerian inflation is really higher than trend. 1. 2, there's a difference between inflation expectations and inflation psychology. Inflation psychology means that you are afraid that your wages are not going to catch up with the price increases. 2, inflation expectations are that if prices are going to continue increasing, you begin to buy things to hoard, which leads to some dysfunctional market distortions. Therefore, inflation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But since it's a global phenomenon, and the answer to it is increase in output. How do you increase output? Like the central bank mentioned, which is output from productivity, technology. But I think there's another answer to it, which is increase the amount of foreign exchange you disperse to the manufacturers. That will increase output, and then that will bring down prices, because on one hand, you would have sucked some naira out of the system and substituted with goods, and secondly, you've got to start moving. You can't have inflation at 15.63 and interest rates at 3%. It creates a distortion in the allocation of resources. So I think, again, we go back to the components of inflation in Nigeria. Core inflation is up to 13.87. Urban inflation is 16.17. Food inflation is 17.3. And rural inflation is 15.11. When you take month on month of 1.82, which is inflation between last month and this month, and you annualize it, you get a rate of 24%. That itself can be disturbing. So the reality is that inflation has become a problem which needs to be nicked at the bud.
So you don't agree that at some point, maybe in the first quarter, it will be moderate?
I'm not that optimistic. I think that I think that inflation will ease and moderate towards the end of the year, but not as soon as
the first quarter.
That's pretty optimistic. But one thing is that because the expectation, one of the drivers of inflation, people thought that because there's an increase in the price of fuel, that will drive, but I don't agree with that argument. I think sooner or later we will have to deal with the subsidy issue. It's not politically expedient at this time, but we will have to deal with that at the appropriate time, somewhere down the road. But I think that inflation will ease after spiking all the way to about June.
It's also interesting that you mentioned the fuel subsidy, which is now, next year. But there's also the fear of, the political season, and many wonder, will this administration be able to concentrate and not be distracted to, of course, with regards to the economic policies for the rest of the year?
They say good economics does not necessarily mean good politics, right? But bad politics leads to bad economics. So the reality is that there's a time for everything. If we miss the opportunity to do what we had to do at the time we had to do it, then that's the price we pay. But you must understand that there are 5 African countries that are in turbulence in terms of their democracies are being derailed. You don't want to play into that narrative, right? Because as sore losers, anything is possible. If you make any strategic economic decisions, which you have to do, it could be interpreted from a political prism and be used against you, and everything comes down. We can't. Nigeria cannot afford to go down the same path as many of those countries. First of all, we're too large, the stakes are high, and we play a very critical role in the geopolitical stability of the region.
Talk to us about the major impact of today's meeting to the Nigerian, the employer, the trader.
Well, the truth is that, one, interest rates remain artificially low for now, which means that if you are a borrower, low interest rates is better to borrow now than to be a lender. A lender will be repaid in less valuable naira down the road. 2, so creditors are likely to be worse off. 3, naira investors will lose value because they think there's better value outside, but fortunately, the stock market is moving, and therefore, but employers will be challenged because people are going to ask for higher salaries. But when you now look at the ordinary guy down there, that's the ordinary guys, the bag of rice is still 30,000 naira. Beans is about 25,000 naira, which is up significantly. Beans is about 22,000 naira, and gari is about 15,000 naira. Flour is 22,000 naira. So that tells you what's going to happen to those guys. For the middle class, your school fees is going to be, it's already higher. Everybody knows that as you go back to school. Your rent is higher. Your medical bills are higher because drugs. Now, the same thing will happen. Flight tickets for those who are going abroad, their flight tickets are more expensive. Of course, international school fees and medical bills are higher. So, what next? What you need to look up to is that the solution. So there'll be another MPC meeting in March. We'll look at that and see what happens. Most likely, there might be an increase. There are going to be political conventions, consensus, primaries, direct and indirect primaries. You'll have some form, but there'll be a distraction of policymakers and political office holders away from the main event. But kicking the can down the road doesn't mean that the problem gets solved. The problem only gets worse. Now, the main thing to do is that since this is the end of the life of this administration, people have to look forward to what happens next. The truth is that the political response of instability across the region is more out of economic incompetence and mismanagement. So voters, as you go along, the answer is to make sure that whichever administration comes in must be led by people who have the capacity and the knowledge to make rational and efficient economic decisions, because a bad economic decision is likely to lead to a wrong political outcome. So, but anyway, we are cautiously optimistic that by this time next year, we should be better off than we are this year. Cautious optimism.
Thank you, Mr. Bismarck Rewane, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Thank you for joining us on the News at 10.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead on the News at 10, Vice President Professor Emeshibajo calls for reforms in the justice sector to engender confidence, plus top stories on business news. Join us again. And from Lagos, it's to our Abuja studios, where Markwe Ogun Yusuf is standing by with more stories. Hi, Markwe.
Hello, Millicent. At the heart of Aso Rock is where we kick off, as Nigeria has taken a big step in the deployment of fifth-generation 5G technology, as the president has launched the national policy on it for the nation's digital economy. During the event at the State House in Abuja, President Muhammadu Buhari directed all security institutions to leverage the technology when deployed, explaining that it will enhance security in the country. He also allayed fears over the health safety of the technology.
5G technology is significantly faster than earlier digital technologies, and it provides near real-time communications. This can play a key role in boosting our efforts towards enhancing security across the nation. It will enable our security institutions to effectively deploy autonomous vehicles, augmented and virtual reality to address any security challenges that we face. The policy was presented and approved at the Federal Executive Council meeting on the 8th of September 2021, following a robust debate. To this end, I hereby direct all the security institutions to immediately leverage 5G when deployed in order to beef up security in the country. The national 5G policy includes a deployment plan to ensure that major cities across the country benefit from the technologies. It also seeks to make 5G a major driver of our economy, a catalyst for smart cities in the country, and a platform for creation of jobs that support our digital economy.
President Muhammadu Buhari launching 5G technology at the State House. Now, the challenges facing the justice sector must be resolved intentionally to engender confidence in the sector from both citizens and foreign investors. This is the view of the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, which he made known while delivering his remarks at the 2022 Justice Sector Summit held in Abuja. He also called for better remuneration for judges to be at par with their counterparts in the legislature. Our correspondent Kayla Megwa reports.
It is a gathering of legal luminaries from across the country. A summit organized by the Nigerian Bar Association and the Justice Research Institute to come up with solutions to issues bedeviling the Nigerian judiciary.
The question we must ask ourselves today is simple. What is stopping us from providing justice to our people? And what must we do to change it?
Opening plenary focuses on devising practical solutions towards improved performance, enhanced accountability, and independence in the justice sector.
A budgetary provision, I think, of about 104 billion has been provided for the judiciary in the national budget. Less amount is provided for the legislature. Why is the 104 billion provided in the budget not sufficient for judiciary? We are not in a position to answer. Why? Because the books are not open.
A sitting court judge residence was attacked, and then we keep behaving as if nothing has been wrong. If we keep hounding them and getting them to go to their shelves, how then would they be proud and then hold their shoulders high to be able to dispense the justice that we want?
For the Vice President, the process of appointment of judicial officers must be more rigorous and based solely on merit. He calls for their salaries to be benchmarked with their legislative counterparts.
If we benchmark what a federal judicial officer, if we benchmark what the Court of Appeal judge earns to what the House of Representative legislator, such as Honorable Luke, earns, if we benchmark it, you will find that it's a startling difference. There's a difference between maybe 600,000 and 8 million. I mean, it's incredible. The responsibilities of the judge or justice of the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeal are such that they must be well remunerated.
Please pick your terms.
Delays in the dispensation of criminal justice, remuneration of these judicial officers, and ensuring that the judiciary is accountable for the amount of money it receives. The judiciary may seem like the favorite whipping boy of the country, but these are actual problems that affect its perception both at home and abroad, and that's what this summit seeks to address. Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.
The political space in Borno State is warming up as stakeholders in the opposition People's Democratic Party are beginning to re-strategize ahead of the 2023 elections. The party has mobilized loyalists to revalidate their membership in their local units, a call that has been heeded by many. One of them is a former managing director of the defunct Federal Savings International Bank, Mr. Mohammed Hayatuddin.
Members of the People's Democratic Party in Borno State are in jubilation mood following the decision of a former managing director of Federal Savings International Bank, Alhaji Mohammed Hayatuddin, to revalidate his membership of the party in Adamari in Jere local government area of Borno State. Apparently not impressed by the achievements of the All Progressive Congress, both at the federal and state levels, Alhaji Hayatuddin urges his supporters to join the PDP.
This nation is headed in the wrong direction. The signs of decay afflicting this nation has been looming on the horizon for a very long period of time. But especially in the last 13 years, we have seen this country lose so much of its prestige, and therefore there are many reasons why I'm standing here before you today. One of them is the glaring absence of citizens' action and participation in the political affairs of this nation. Many of us really do not care so long as we take care of our families, so long as we clothe ourselves, ride our cars, go to work, make an income.
The Borno State chapter of the party is elated to have the new member on board.
Sun ce canji dole. Saboda haka Allah ya canja sai ya ce bari in bar ku da dole. To dole ne yau shinkafar 7,000 ya zama 30,000. Indomi naira 500 ya zama 2,000.
The party did not reveal its plans for the next elections, but loyalists are in high spirits, hopeful for better outings.
And in a bid to recover River State assets, Governor Nyesom Wike says his government has discovered the state-owned legacy 600 aircraft that was flown to and abandoned in Germany since 2012. He said this when he led a delegation to meet with the General Manager of Business Development, General Atomics Aerotech in Munich.
By 2012, this plane was brought here. Reasons we do not know. But I guess that maybe for inspection. But what bothered us was that there was no documentation to show as we were coming into government in 2015. You can imagine the plane was there in 2012. Then I came in 2015, 3 years. So the issue is, why was there no documentation to let the government come in to do that? Look, we have this facility and we sent it to RUAG before for inspection. Again, I do know from experience that inspection of such facility does not take more than 6 months, right? So if it was brought in 2012, expectantly at least by early 2013, the plane ought to have come back.
And that's all from the nation's capital. It's right back to you, Millicent, for the rest of the news at 10.
Thanks, Mark. And staying with aviation, the Nigeria Civil Aviation Authority, NCAA, has upgraded the Anambra International Cargo and Passenger Airport Umueri to Aerodrome Rescue and Firefighting ARFF Category 6 to operate Boeing 737-700 or its equivalent. The approval was transmitted to the State Governor, Willie Obiano, through a letter signed by the Director General of the NCAA. Obiano says the upgrade reflects his administration's determination towards ensuring that the airport functions at full capacity for all. And business news is next. Here's Anne Wilder.
Thanks a lot, Millicent. Hello and welcome to Business News. We begin with the International Monetary Fund saying that it now expects the global economy to grow by 4.4% this year, down by 0.5%, projections which was made in October last year. In its latest World Economic Outlook released today, the IMF cited multiple challenges expected to be faced by global economies, especially the US and China, as they battle rising inflation, which is expected to last longer than previously expected amid ongoing supply chain disruptions and high energy prices. However, the IMF has reaffirmed its 2.7% rate growth outlook for Nigeria this year. The chairman and chief executive officer of Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, has emerged as Africa's richest man for the 11th year in a row. The latest report coming from Forbes and the richest people on the continent puts Dangote's worth at an estimated $13.9 billion, and that's coming up from $12.1 billion last year, following a 30% increase in the share price of his most industrial goods giant, Dangote Cement. At the same time, Forbes also listed the founder of Boa Group, Abdulsamad Rabiu, as the continent's fifth richest person, with a net worth of about $7 billion, following the listing of one of his company's subsidiaries, Boa Foods, on the Nigerian Exchange Limited early in January this year. And we head to the stock market, where investors have gained 6.06 billion naira today, as it rebounded marginally by 0.02%, coming from its previous loss yesterday. Layo Adegoke has the details.
Thank you for joining us for the stock market report. Profit taking at the local bourse seemed shortened as the market returned to the green territory at the close of trading today, though marginally. That's it, the 0.02% all-share index meant 6 billion naira was added to the total market value. Activity chart was mixed as deals dropped by almost 5% to 4,242. Volume lost about 11%. Value was the only positive on the chart. It added almost 24% at 3.577 billion naira. Let's look at the sectors. Banking was favored by investors, up over 0.5%. ETI was the most profitable today, gaining 90 kobo. Oil and gas plus 0.69. Seplat is also back on the bull run, gaining 10 naira on its share price. Now, the one Seplat share cost 790 naira. Insurance was down 0.88%. Insurance has not been having good outing for some time now. Top trades by value had Seplat leading. It drove almost 1 billion naira in transactions today to claim that position, followed by GTCO and Zenith Bank. The trio were involved in almost 800 deals. Well, glad to be back on the winning trail. That's it on the stock market report. I'm Layo Adegoke.
And that's Business News tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Anne Nwaodo. The rest of the news at 10 continues now with Millicent.
Thank you, Anne. Now, London's Metropolitan Police says it is investigating a number of events at Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Downing Street residence in Whitehall for potential breaches of COVID restrictions. The move, according to the Commissioner, follows information from the Cabinet Office inquiry team and her officer's assessment. We'll hear Simon Pusey with more in Around the World in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5.
At least 8 people have been killed and 38 injured in a crush outside an Africa Cup of Nations football match. Videos showed crowds of screaming football fans being crushed at the entry gates to the Paul Biya Stadium in the capital Yaoundé. Witnesses described chaotic scenes outside the ground as thousands of fans struggled to get access. The dead include a 14-year-old boy, while 7 people were seriously injured. Cameroonian President Paul Biya has ordered an investigation into the crush and sent his deepest condolences to the victims' families. The Confederation of African Football has also launched its own investigation. Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken to members of the country's Winter Olympics team ahead of the Winter Games. It comes as the Kremlin said Washington's actions around Ukraine were escalating tensions and that Russia was watching with great concern. The United States has flown out military aid and support, as well as putting 8,500 troops on alert to be deployed to Europe if needed. Denmark and other NATO countries are also sending forces. Here, a Danish Navy frigate heading to the Baltic region as tensions rise. At least 7 Bangladeshi migrants who were on a boat from Libya heading for the Mediterranean island of Lampedusa have died of hypothermia. The Coast Guard saw the boat overnight, some 29 kilometres off the coast of an uninhabited island near Lampedusa. The Coast Guard released a video of the rescue operation with an accompanying statement that 3 migrants were found on the boat already dead, while 4 others, who were in a critical condition being treated by doctors, died before reaching the island. There were 280 migrants on board the boat, which was just 20 metres long.
I can confirm that the Met is now investigating a number of events that took place at Downing Street and Whitehall in the last 2 years.
London's Metropolitan Police have launched an investigation into parties held in number 10 Downing Street during the coronavirus pandemic.
My officers have assessed several other events.
Commissioner Cressida Dick said they were looking into potential breaches of COVID-19 regulations.
Happy birthday!
It's after it emerged that Prime Minister Boris Johnson attended his birthday party, which was thrown for him during lockdown last year, along with around 30 other people. Fresh aftermath photographs have been published showing devastation across Tonga's worst affected outlying islands. The power supply has steadily resumed in most of the blackout areas. Photographs from Nomuka show ash coating toppled building structures and interiors of buildings ridden with debris and damage. Around 4,600 people have been left stranded across Turkey after heavy snow brought cars to a standstill. Vehicles were seen stranded on roads in Turkey's capital, Istanbul, with some stuck for several hours. Hundreds of passengers stranded in Istanbul Airport, Europe's largest, anxiously waited to board their aircrafts on Tuesday as flights gradually began to resume. Meanwhile, a woman narrowly avoided a huge slab of snow while getting onto this bus, which was filled with snow and ice soon after. Drone footage shows the extent of the snowfall across some of the city's most iconic landmarks. Over 200 South Korean small business owners have shaved their heads in Seoul to protest against the government's extension of curfews and restrictions. It comes amid growing coronavirus cases brought about by the fast-spreading Omicron variant. Business owners, some in tears, had their heads shaved on a makeshift stage under a large banner. And finally, as the year of the tiger draws near, artist Nguyen Tan Phat is exercising his talents to carve teeth, stripes and claws out of wooden blocks and other stone-like material. Phat is aiming to carve a total of 2,022 tigers in honour of the year 2022 by April. The 39-year-old has proudly added local elements to his creations, in addition to traditional Vietnamese lacquer techniques. He plans to put all 2,022 tigers on display in an exhibition before eventually selling them off.
And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel studios in Lagos.
Well, thanks, Simon. And now to sports news. CAF President Patrice Motsepe has confirmed the next African Cup of Nations match due to take place at Yaounde's Olembe Stadium has been moved following Monday's deadly stampede, which killed 8 and left dozens injured. At today's emergency media briefing, Mr. Motsepe says the continent football ruling body would make sure that the safety of every single spectator is of primary concern. Senegal beat 9-man Cape Verde 2-0 in the round of 16 at the African Cup of Nations to reach the quarterfinal of the competition. Goals from Sadio Mane and Bambe Dieng ensured victory for the Teranga Lions. Elsewhere, Morocco came from behind to defeat Malawi 2-1 in another round of 16 game played at Amadou Ahidjo Stadium. Gabadion Mango gave the Flames of Malawi the lead in the 7th minute, but the Atlas Lions of Morocco fought back with goals from Yusuf and Hakimi to win the game. And that'll be all on sports news. Back to you, Millicent.
Thank you, Chris. And the main news again. The federal government today announced a proposal to extend the subsidy regime by 18 months, thereby tossing the decision on petroleum subsidy removal to the next government. That's the news at 10 tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Have a good night and stay safe.